Hello and welcome. My name is Mr. Cannell, and in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to create a multiple exposure image similar in style to Pep Ventosa. Now, the way in which we are editing today is not exactly the same way Ventosa does his work, where Ventosa takes multiple images of the same object from a range of different angles and then composites them on top of one another. We're going to only be using a single image, replicating it several times and overlaying these copies with a slight offset. Now, the end result is similar enough that a comparison can easily be drawn between the two, and is easy enough that one shoot can be used to take shots of multiple objects, giving us a greater variety and number of edits per shoot. Now, when we are taking shots for Pep Ventosa, it's important to remember a couple of things. So let's have a look at this car image. Ensure that you are picking a subject for your photographs that has a good edge to it, something with strong, sharp lines and angles. The reason for this is that organic objects, anything with smooth lines, tends to get a little bit lost in all the extra layers that we layer on top of one another, and becomes a little bit more difficult to read. Whereas if we use really strong, sharp lines, especially if the object happens to have them on the not just the profile, but also inside the object. So here we've got these sharp lines on the bonnet and around the headlamps. They're going to help give a more dynamic sense of structure to your final image. Now, when taking the shot, you want to avoid any distracting objects in the background. This will help with getting a really good, quick, easy selection of your object. And it's also important to remember that you'll want everything to be sharp and in focus. So to achieve that, you'll want to probably use a high f-stop. And this will mean that your aperture will be rather small, so we're looking around the f16 mark, f20, and preferably you're outdoors for this, because then the amount of light coming into your camera, although limited by the aperture, might still be enough to capture just as it is. Now, if your image is coming out quite dark because you've had to raise the f-stop to get that sharp edge, you might want to consider the following. Either bring down the shutter speed. Usually we start around the 600 to 800 mark, bring it down to either 540, 400, and see if slowing the shutter speed down will allow more light into the camera and hopefully brighten your shot. If it's still not bright enough, to avoid going even further and possibly adding a bit too much blur to the shot, try raising the ISO. Now, the ISO is the light sensor in the camera, and if we're outdoors on a lovely sunny day, we tend to use an ISO of around 200. When there's cloud cover on the same day, if clouds come over and it darkens considerably, we tend to up our ISO to 400. So same here, if our shot is a little bit too dark and we're set at 200 ISO, raise that up to 400. Indoors, we tend to start taking photographs around the 1600 mark. If there's a lot of light in the room, we can maybe bring that down to 800. But try not to go above 1600 where possible. If you're indoors, try not to go above 3200. And hopefully that will give you a nice, well-lit, decently exposed image with these lovely, beautiful, sharp lines we can use. On to the actual edit itself. So to begin with, you might want to unlock your layer. This one's already unlocked, but make sure if it is, you can just double click and press enter to confirm. To make my selection of my car, I'm going to go up to the object selection tool, which is W as a hotkey on your keyboard, and just draw around my car like so. Now, don't worry too much if your selection is a little bit jagged. We can just tidy that up now. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and scroll in with my mouse wheel just to zoom in a little bit tighter on this wing mirror. I'm going to use a magnetic lasso tool whilst holding down the Shift key to add to my selection. So I'm just going to make a few clicks and guide the cursor around the edge, just like that. And when I'm finished selecting my area, I double click whilst holding the Shift key so that it all combines. If you notice, if I move my cursor over here, hold down the Shift key, the cursor changes to a plus sign. That means we're adding to the selection we currently have up. going to use the space bar to move around and just double check a few things. I'm not so keen on this up here, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key this time and just remove those unwanted parts of my selection. Double clicking to confirm the transformation, to confirm the choice of selection. Now I'm not too worried about these areas up here. I think that should be fine. Now the areas down here we'll deal with in a minute, and I'm not too fussed. So now what I'm going to do is, with that selection up, I'm going to go to my layer panel, go down to the bottom of that panel and select the layer mask button, the little circle inside the rectangle, clicking on that, and now we've cut out our car. You'll notice that our layer now has two thumbnails. The first thumbnail, this one here with the white border around it now, is our original image. It's still there. All the information still exists. We haven't removed or deleted anything. We've just hidden it, and we've hidden it by using a layer mask. This masks off parts of the image that we choose. Those are denoted by the black areas in the layer mask. Anything that's in black on the layer mask will not be shown. It's hidden. And anything in white is revealed. Now, to smooth out this bottom part of the car, I'm going to reveal more of that edge. To do that, I'm going to use the brush tool, which is this little brush icon here, or you can press B on your keyboard to get that up. I'm going to make sure that my color is set to white because we're going to want to reveal this bottom section of the car. And I'm going to check the opacity of my brush because I want there to be a soft blend, because I think it'll work better with our background if it's has a bit of a fade to it. So checking here, it may very well start off as 100%, bring that down to around the 40-50 mark. Then I'm going to come to my edge, make sure that my layer mask is selected in the layer panel and not the image, so make sure the white border is around the layer mask, and then just start clicking around the parts of the image I want to reveal again. This doesn't take too long, and you don't have to be too neat, just try to stay inside the shape of your object. So rather than coming out here and bringing the edge in, start here on the inside of the car and go along. So we get that nice little fade, and just go along that edge, double clicking in a few places just to bring bits of it back. Just keep clicking along that edge until you're happy that the blend and the fade works quite nicely. I'm going to do a little bit under where that shadow is in the tire so that I bring some of the ground back. Not too much, but just enough that when we put a background in here, it's going to blend quite nicely. Almost done with that. Nice and quick. Simple, easy blend. There we go. That should be fine. I'm now going to create a new layer for my background. Now there are a number of different ways in which you can do this, but for this particular style of image, I want a two-tone gradient on my background. So I'm first going to create a new layer. Now I can do that by going up to the menu bar up here and selecting layer, selecting new and clicking layer, or you can hold down Control, Shift and N together to create a new layer like I've just done. I'll press OK to confirm. And you'll notice in the layer panel we've got our new layer. You can rename that. I'm going to call it background. And now I'm going to select the marquee selection tool. It's the second tool down. And if you don't see it there, just change it so it's the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to select this top area first, and I'm going to swap my colors over in the color picker here just by clicking on that little icon or pressing the X key on your keyboard. And I'm going to make sure white is on the bottom, and I want a blue for the top half, so it kind of feels like sky. So I've selected those. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click and no, I'm not. I'm going to select my gradient tool. Sorry, select my gradient tool. Now, if you can't see your gradient tool here, it might be a paint bucket. The hotkey for this tool is G. So make sure you're on gradient tool. And you'll notice that we have at the top here a blue fading into a white. Now, if I come to this center of my image, hold down the Shift key and click, and start to slowly drag out, I see this line appear. Now, the reason we're holding down the Shift key is it locks it to certain angles. We can have it going off at a diagonal, horizontal, but I want it vertical. So I'm going to lock it this way. And if you don't hold the Shift key, this is what happens. It will move everywhere. So holding the Shift key locks it in position. And there you go. Releasing the mouse button is going to give us that lovely gradient. Now, clicking on my marquee selection tool again, and I'm going to draw across the bottom this time, across the whole image, and making sure that I overlap the previous gradient ever so slightly. It's going to make sure that we don't end up with any gaps or lines. They're going to change my color to orange, going for a nice iron brew kind of feel to it. Select my gradient tool again, hold down the Shift key, click and drag out that line. And there you go. I'm going to press Ctrl and D to deselect that area. And there you go. A lovely background. Let's put it behind our car by coming over to the layer panel, clicking on the background layer and dragging it below our car. And there you go. And you can see that soft edge that we put on with that nice fade is actually letting it blend in nicely with the background. Now what we're going to do is select our car layer, and just so we don't get confused, let's rename that original car. Now, you can call it what you like, but that's going to help me identify the original layer. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Ctrl and J with that original car layer selected, and it's going to copy everything that was on that layer. As I hadn't created a selection around it. If I press Ctrl and J with the original car layer selected, it copies everything and duplicates that whole layer. Now, with that layer selected, I'm going to change the way in which that layer interacts with all the other layers below it. And to do that, I go to this bar here where it says normal and open that up. I get all my blend modes, and if you scroll through those, you can see all the crazy different interactions our layer can go through. I'm going to pick overlay, and this allows the object to become semi-transparent, where the sharper lines and where there's greater contrast will be darker, and where there are flat elements of color, they'll be lighter. I'm also going to change the opacity down to something around the 30% mark. This is going to make it less dark as I increase the number of layers I have. If we kept it at 100%, it will get quite dark, this final image. So dropping the opacity there in this copy is going to make it easier for us to use more layers and get a greater range on the ghosting that you're going to see in a minute. I'm then going to press the V key or click on this movement tool icon at the top of my toolbar and just click and drag out that new layer. And you'll start seeing there's a little bit of ghosting occurring, and that's our new layer with the overlay and the drop in opacity. So to show you what I meant by having 100% on the opacity, you'll see it's actually quite strong. And whilst that is somewhat nice in areas, it's maybe a little bit too strong in the middle section and around the tire, and we'll lose a lot of details if we keep it at 100%. So I'm going to drop that back down to about 35 or 30%. If you're finding the slider a little bit tricky, you can double click and just type in your percentage if you prefer. So I'm going to keep that at 30. Now with that layer set to a 30% opacity and set to overlay, if I duplicate that layer, it's going to copy those functions as well. So Control and J to copy that layer. And I'm just going to shift that image across slightly using my movement tool, which is still selected. Control J again to duplicate again. I'm going to move that up. And I'm just going to do this a few more times, just until I'm satisfied with the level of blur and all these intersecting lines. There you go. I'm happy with that. And there you go. We have an image in the style of Pep Ventosa. And you can see if we compared this to a Pep Ventosa image, a lot of his work is essentially a number of layered images on top of one another. Although they're taken from different angles, this style does give us a sense of looking at the object from different angles. It does give us a sense that everything's sort of blurred out whilst maintaining that sharp edge. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.